with a witty smile and the demeanor of a polite gentleman. But
You know that feeling when you meet someone famous and something just feels off? Like a little alarm bell ringing in the back of your head? Well, imagine having that feeling every single day for 30 years, but on live television. That was Johnny Carson's life. For 3 decades, he sat behind that legendary desk, the picture of calm, witty charm. But behind that polite smile, his intuition was working overtime. He saw what no one else did. He saw the real person sitting across from him. Over 22,000 guests sat in that chair. Most were fine. Some were wonderful. But a handful? They made his skin crawl. Johnny kept a mental black book, and 6 names were permanently redlined. These weren't just bad guests. They were rotten people. The kind of people who made you want to take a shower after being in the same room with them. Today, we're opening that book. Forget the laughs for a minute. Let's talk about the guys who made Johnny Carson shudder with disgust. First up is Oliver Reed. Now, in the 70s, Reed was a movie star in the truest sense. That rugged British charm, those deep blue eyes, he had it all. But he also had a demon living in a bottle. For Oliver, drinking wasn't about having a good time. It was about picking fights. It was about proving how much of a man he was. And that was a problem because The Tonight Show had one supreme, unspoken rule. You show up sober. Johnny Carson, a guy who loved to party as much as anyone, always kept a clear head on stage. He respected the audience, the show, and himself. So, nothing disgusted him more than a guest who was sloppy, out of control, and spewing nonsense to millions of people. On September 26th, 1975, Oliver Reed wobbled onto that stage, and it was clear from the first step he was gone. His face was flushed, his eyes were wild, and he couldn't walk a straight line to save his life. Instead of a charming guest, he was a belligerent drunk. He flopped into the chair, threw his feet up, and started slurring. Johnny, being a pro, tried to steer things towards cinema to salvage the segment. But Oliver didn't care. He was too busy revealing the ugly truth. A man who, in his cups, despised women. Sitting next to him was Shelley Winters, an Oscar-winning actress and a fierce feminist. This was a recipe for disaster. At first, Reed ignored her, but when Shelley tried to join the conversation, he turned on her with pure contempt. He told her she didn't have the intellect for men's talk, that her place was in the kitchen, and called her a loudmouth broad. The studio went dead silent. Johnny's smile vanished. He wasn't looking at a talented actor anymore. He was looking at a bully. But before Johnny could intervene, Shelley made her move. She stood up, grabbed her glass of water, and without a single word, swung her arm. Splash! The entire cup of ice-cold water hit Oliver Reed square in the face. The studio erupted. The audience leaped to their feet, roaring with applause. It was the perfect public shaming. But the best part was Johnny. He didn't panic. He didn't rush to hand Reed a towel. He just sat there for a second, looking at the soaked, pathetic figure in front of him, with a look that said, "You got exactly what you deserved." He then turned to a trembling Shelley and gave her a quiet nod of approval. For Oliver Reed, it was just another wild story. For Johnny, it was the end. He told his producer, "Never let that guy near me again unless he's sober or I'm dead." That night, Johnny saw the demon in Oliver Reed, and his stage was too clean for that kind of trash. Next is Bob Crane. If you grew up in the 60s, you knew him as Colonel Hogan from Hogan's Heroes. He was the all-American dad, the charming hero. But Johnny Carson's gut told him something was deeply wrong. Every time Bob was on the show, he was funny, he played the drums. Instead of a charming guest, he was a belligerent drunk. He flopped into the chair, threw his feet up, and started slurring. Johnny, being a pro, tried to steer things towards cinema to salvage the segment. But Oliver didn't care. He was too busy revealing the ugly truth. A man who, in his cups, despised women. Sitting next to him was Shelley Winters, an Oscar-winning actress and a fierce feminist. This was a recipe for disaster. At first, Reed ignored her, but when Shelley tried to join the conversation, he turned on her with pure contempt. He told her she didn't have the intellect for men's talk, that her place was in the kitchen, and called her a loudmouth broad. The studio went dead silent. Johnny's smile vanished. He wasn't looking at a talented actor anymore. He was looking at a bully. But before Johnny could intervene, Shelley made her move. She stood up, grabbed her glass of water, and without a single word, swung her arm. Splash! The entire cup of ice-cold water hit Oliver Reed square in the face. The studio erupted. The audience leaped to their feet, roaring with applause. It was the perfect public shaming. But the best part was Johnny. He didn't panic. He didn't rush to hand Reed a towel. He just sat there for a second, looking at the soaked, pathetic figure in front of him, with a look that said, "You got exactly what you deserved." He then turned to a trembling Shelley and gave her a quiet nod of approval. For Oliver Reed, it was just another wild story. For Johnny, it was the end. He told his producer, "Never let that guy near me again unless he's sober or I'm dead." That night, Johnny saw the demon in Oliver Reed, and his stage was too clean for that kind of trash. Next is Bob Crane. If you grew up in the 60s, you knew him as Colonel Hogan from Hogan's Heroes. He was the all-American dad, the charming hero. But Johnny Carson's gut told him something was deeply wrong. Every time Bob was on the show, he was funny, he played the drums, the ratings were great. But as soon as the camera stopped, Johnny would lean over to Ed McMahon and whisper, "This guy gives me the creeps." What Johnny sensed was Bob's secret life. Behind the wholesome image was a pathological sex addiction and an obsession with secretly filming his encounters with hundreds of women. It was a dark, sick world, and Bob tried to pull Johnny into it. During breaks, he'd open his briefcase and show Johnny and Ed explicit photos of his conquests, whispering, "Hey, you should see this one. I can arrange something for you." To Johnny, a gentleman who kept his work and private life separate, this was the ultimate vulgarity. It wasn't an invitation. It was the solicitation of a pimp. Johnny would shut him down cold every time, but Bob was too lost in his own lust to notice the contempt. He just kept sinking deeper into Johnny's mental black book. The story ended in the most horrific way. In 1978, Bob Crane was found brutally murdered, beaten to death with a camera tripod. The police found his collection of tapes. The hero image was shattered. But The Tonight Show, Johnny wasn't surprised by the root cause. He had seen the emptiness in Bob's eyes years ago. He knew the darkness was there, waiting to consume him. Then there was Chevy Chase. In the 70s, he was the new hotshot from Saturday Night Live. "I'm Chevy Chase, and you're not." That line wasn't just a joke. It was his entire personality. Johnny initially saw him as a potential successor, a new star with sharp wit. But he was wrong. Chevy wasn't just confident. He was a bully, and his arrogance was completely sober. His scumbaggery started backstage. While Johnny treated the crew like family, Chevy treated them like garbage. He yelled at makeup artists, mocked assistants, and threw his weight around like a king. Johnny heard every complaint. To him, disrespecting his staff was like a guest coming to your house and kicking your cat. It was unforgivable, but it got worse on air. Chevy didn't come to chat. He came to prove he was smarter than Johnny. He'd interrupt, mock Johnny's questions, and lean back with a smug look, as if doing the show was a favor. His humor was mean. While Johnny built laughs on wit or self-deprecation, Chevy laughed at people's pain and failures. He'd mock someone's looks or career decline right on air. Johnny would sit there with a polite smile, but his eyes were ice. He realized Chevy wasn't a great comedian. He was just a mean-spirited brat. So, Johnny used his power. He didn't need to ban him publicly. He just stopped inviting him. While other comedians became regulars and friends, Chevy's appearances dwindled until they vanished. It was the king's silent punishment. Johnny knew that a throne built on contempt for others will eventually collapse under its own weight. And he was right. Let's keep going, because we're not done with the men who made Johnny Carson's skin crawl. We've talked about the drunk and the bully, but what about the clown with a dark side? That brings us to Jerry Lewis. To the world, he was the goofy, squeaky voice comedian, the tireless philanthropist who hosted telethons for hours on end. But Johnny Carson knew a different Jerry. A Jerry without the cameras, without the scripts, and without the kindness. Their relationship was complicated. They were both giants at NBC, and Jerry had even guest hosted for Johnny. But as Johnny grew more composed and sophisticated, Jerry seemed to curdle into a bitter, authoritarian mess. What? Disgusted Johnny most was Jerry's open hostility toward women. In the 70s and 80s, as feminism was gaining ground, Johnny was actively championing female comedians like Joan Rivers. Jerry, meanwhile, was telling the world that a woman's place was having babies. He once said, "I don't like female comedians. I think of a woman as a producing machine. Seeing a woman doing comedy just seems wrong." When he was on The Tonight Show, he'd make demeaning jokes about women, interrupt them, and act like men were a superior species. Johnny, despite his own complicated love life, was always a gentleman on stage. He respected women. So sitting across from Jerry was like facing a spiteful, moss-covered rock from another century. But Jerry's ugliness didn't stop there. He was an audience bully. Johnny always believed if a joke didn't land, it was his own fault. Jerry thought the audience was just stupid. If they didn't laugh, he'd scowl, lecture them about his genius, and whine that the world was going to hell. You could feel the energy being sucked out of the room. Johnny felt like he was babysitting a giant, sulky child, and the rumors about Jerry's cruelty to his own family were chilling. While Johnny tried to protect his kids from the spotlight, Jerry ruled his home like a tyrant. The ultimate proof? He wrote his own 6 sons out of his will, leaving them nothing. Johnny saw a man at the peak of fame who was utterly alone, incapable of loving anyone but his own ego. Eventually, Johnny just got tired of watching the legend self-destruct. We also have to talk about Robert Blake. He was the cool, defiant cop on Beretta. But to Johnny, he wasn't the charming detective. He was the cold-blooded killer Blake, played in Cold Blood. Johnny sensed early on that Blake wasn't acting. He really was dangerous. Blake was a frequent guest, even a guest host, but it was like having a wild animal in your living room. You knew you could never turn your back. Blake's scumbaggery was a deep, simmering hostility. He came to the show not to entertain, but to wage war with the world. He radiated a kind of menacing energy. He'd stare at Johnny with cold, dead eyes and rarely laugh. He loved to talk about guns and violence. He'd say things like, "If anyone crosses me, I'll take care of him." Johnny would try to joke, "Come on, Robert, you only shoot plastic guns." But Blake wouldn't play along. He'd just stare and say, "Johnny, you don't understand. You eat them or they eat you." And the whole studio would fall silent, not out of awe, but fear. Johnny felt this man was a ticking time bomb. His vague fear became a horrific reality in 2001 when Blake's wife was murdered. Blake was accused of masterminding the hit. Though he was acquitted in criminal court, he was found responsible in civil court. For those who knew Johnny, it wasn't a shock. They remembered those dead eyes on the Tonight Show couch decades earlier. They remembered the chill of sitting next to a man who was already a monster. Finally, there's the sad case of Mickey Rooney, a true prodigy, the biggest child star in history. But when he sat in Johnny's chair in his twilight years, he didn't bring wisdom. He brought the bitterness of a has-been and a massive ego packed into a small frame. Johnny respected his talent, but was disgusted by the man he'd become. Mickey was the definition of a dirty old man. He'd grope young female guests on air, patting their thighs and making lewd comments, leaving them frozen with a forced smile while they looked to Johnny for help. Johnny would have to quickly jump in with a joke to change the subject, but the contempt was clear. Worse than the groping was the condescension. Mickey still thought he was the king of Hollywood from the 1930s. He didn't see Johnny as the most powerful host in America. He saw him as a kid who needed a lecture. He'd hijack the interview to preach about professional ethics or complain about his ex-wives, turning the show into his personal therapy session. Johnny would sit there, chin in hand, tapping his pencil, a sure sign he was counting the seconds until the interview was over. You could feel his embarrassment for Mickey. It was just sad. After Mickey left, Johnny would often exhale and make a dry joke to the audience. It was the ultimate punishment, being looked at not with awe, but with pity. So there you have it. 6 legends from Hollywood's golden age who, when they sat on Johnny Carson's couch, revealed the ugliest parts of themselves. They thought fame was a shield that could hide their rotten character. But Johnny's intuition was sharper than any camera lens. He taught us a hard lesson. Talent might get you in the door, but it's character that keeps you in the room. These men, for all their glory, ended up as stains in the audience's memory. while Johnny Carson remains the respected king, the great gatekeeper who knew that some people just don't deserve the spotlight. What do you think? Did any of these stories surprise you? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the secret history of old Hollywood, don't forget to follow and share.